Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So 2019 has officially left us and the time has come to take a look at the plethora of TV shows that we have on offer and decide once and for all, definitively in this video, what the top 10 best TV shows were of 2019. So similarly to my best films of 2019 list, this is going to be a ranking of the top 10 best TV shows that I got a chance to see during this year. But again, I will give you guys the exact same disclosure that I gave in my best movies list. There is no way in hell that I would have been able to see every single TV show that came out this year. I mean, films are hard enough, but when it comes to TV shows, there are literally thousands of TV shows, and these days when it comes to prestige television, a lot of these shows have episodes that are just about movie length anyway, so it would literally take me decades to be able to see every single episode of every single show that came out this year. So I definitely have a much smaller pool to work with, but I think I did a pretty good job of catching up with all of the bigger shows that came out this year, with the exception of The Mandalorian. I have not seen The Mandalorian yet. Disney Plus is not yet available in the UK, so I didn't get a chance to catch it, and I wasn't bothered to go through this whole VPN process. So I'm just gonna wait until April 2020 when we get Disney Plus here in the UK. But I know that it's going to be up there on a lot of people's lists of the best TV shows, but unfortunately I didn't get a chance to catch it, so we're working with what we have here. But I think it's a pretty good selection once again, and hopefully you guys will agree with me. If you do, or even if you don't, please be sure to comment in the comment section. Let me know what your thoughts are on the best TV shows of this year. Another disclaimer that I wanted to add is that there may be a few spoilers in these mini reviews, so if you haven't gotten a chance to see some of these shows and you don't want to know anything going in, then perhaps skip some of those sections of the review. And the final disclaimer for this video, I promise, before we get to the main list, this list is more of a judgment of the seasons of television that was aired this year. So I'm not going to be judging the show as a whole, but rather the season that was aired this year and whether that stacks up to some of the other shows that I'm going to be mentioning. Alright, so without further ado, let's get into my list of the top 10 TV shows that we saw in 2019. At number 10, we have The Handmaid's Tale Season 3. Now, this show has all of the markings of a prestigious television show. It has incredible performances. It has beautiful cinematography, truly stunning cinematography. I think this show is known for how stunning its cinematography is at this point. It really is such a beautifully constructed show, and it has such an incredible source material to draw from that make for some of the best episodes of television that I've ever had the pleasure of witnessing. I mean, this is truly a phenomenal show, and I go into a lot more detail about season 3 of The Handmaid's Tale in my review, so I'll link that down below in the description box. But I definitely sung the praises of this show during my review. And what's most notable about season 3 is that even though there were ups and downs throughout the entire season, it certainly stuck the landing. I think the season finale was such a fantastic, beautiful episode, and I think that's largely why I finished this season of The Handmaid's Tale in such a good mood, because it finished off with such an excellent season finale, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do in season 4. But I still haven't forgotten one of my biggest criticisms about this show, which is that it moves so slowly. I think there's a difference between the storytelling in, say, Game of Thrones season 8, which moved at breakneck speed, versus trudging along for hours on a somewhat repetitive character journey. I think the show at times feels trapped with the latter scenario, and there's definitely a middle ground in there somewhere. There is a way to develop these characters slowly and to build this world slowly, whilst not making us feel like we're going on this really long, arduous journey just to get to some interesting plot points. You know, there are so many elements of this world that have yet to be built up, that have yet to be explained, including how Gilead even came about, and yet the story forgoes so many of these elements in favor of focusing on June yet again for another season, and a lot of the elements of her character arc are just so repetitive at this point. I'm hoping that because we've reached this incredible season finale, it means that we have something more to look forward to that goes beyond just June's personal story. And number 9, we have Peaky Blinders season 5. Now, I didn't get a chance to review this season of Peaky Blinders, but do not mistake my lack of a review for lack of interest in this show. I love this show. I love going back to the world of Peaky Blinders with Thomas Shelby and the entire Shelby family. I love seeing what this gang of horrible, terrible, but lovable people are up to. I'm such a huge fan of Peaky Blinders, but season 4 I thought was even more spectacular than the other seasons of Peaky Blinders. I thought season 4 was the peak of the show. I loved the mafia storyline. I especially loved the fact that it had always been in the background. So I especially liked the way that it came to a head during that season. And so after the excellence that was season 4, we had season 5, and overall I was pretty pleased with what we got. But I have to say that a small part of me was slightly disappointed, and I'll explain why. Firstly, I thought some of the pacing this season was a little bit off, considering they have so few episodes to work with every season. In the past, it's never felt like a drag to watch the entire show. It's always felt like things are moving at a good pace and you're really following along with the plot. It's developing in dynamic and exciting ways. But here this season, I felt like there was a lot of meandering. I felt like there was a lot of Tommy kind of twiddling his thumbs and thinking about his philosophical ideologies, and it didn't really make for a compelling story arc for the character, especially because, second point, for some reason they made Tommy into this good guy character. I feel like this season the show really wanted us to believe that Tommy has this good moral core, this moral center guiding his actions, and the way in which they did that this season is by showing us the rise of fascism in the UK, with Mosley's character being the head of a fascist party, and Tommy is very fervently against this and his entire plan revolves around stopping it. But my question, and the question that a lot of characters ask him in the show, is why? Why is it that all of a sudden he is so concerned about a moral issue like fascism? Why is it that all of a sudden he's so pro-black? They tried to allude to the fact that because his sister is in a relationship with a black man, it's kind of made him see that point of view. But at the same time, it just doesn't really align with his moral ideologies from the previous season. He's never really been an SJW type figure. Like, look at who he is, look at how he got there. It didn't quite make sense to me, it didn't quite add up. Now, an argument could be made that the confliction regarding his morality is a reflection of the instability of his mental state at this point, because he's dealing with PTSD from World War I and also the loss of his wife, his first wife Grace, who I never liked. I never cared about Grace. Can we just get over her? Fine. She's still here, she's still appearing in the form of an apparition because he's taking these drugs in order to see her. So because they've made it clear that mentally he's not quite stable, he's not quite healthy, of course they also reiterate the point because he's also learning a bit more about Sigmund Freud, the father of psychology, and so that's definitely something that's always been present when it comes to Tommy's character. But I don't think it quite makes sense that that would manifest into him becoming, you know, an SJW. I think what makes more sense is that he wants to stop Mosley from rising to power because he wants to be the one in power, and Mosley poses the biggest threat that he's seen in a very long time, especially because he became rather comfortable in the Houses of Parliament. And in terms of Mosley himself, I think Sam Claflin did a great job of portraying this horrible, detestable character, but I definitely think that we're working with a 2-season story arc here. We haven't really seen all of what Mosley has to offer to this show. As a result, his storyline will carry on to season 6, where we'll be able to see the culmination of this entire story arc. In terms of some of the side characters, you have of course the return of the Shelby siblings and Aunt Pole, who is just... Small spoilers ahead for the ending of season 5 of Peaky Blinders. Aunt Pole was so close to getting a semblance of a happy ending, and it was just ripped away from her from the freaking Billy Boys. Oh my goodness, I felt so bad for her. I'd actually warmed up to Abraham Gold. I really enjoyed him, and to see him die like that was just abysmal. Oh, it really upset me. I can't wait to see what kind of revenge the Peaky Blinders have for his death, but hopefully they avenge him well. And speaking of some of the Peaky Blinders, I think Arthur, His story arc is just a circle at this point. Like, it's getting so frustrating to see him go through. Speaking of repetitive story arcs, just the same thing over and over and over again. I'm tired of it. I get it. He has PTSD. He has anger issues. He has alcohol issues. We need to do something with this character. Just do something with him because it's getting frustrating. And speaking of frustration, whilst I did think that this season ended on a high, I liked the fact that we finally got to see Tommy meet his match. He actually lost, his plan didn't work. I don't love how we got there. I think it was really, really frustrating to have Finn be such a weak link in the family and just show true idiocy in this season. I thought it was so disappointing to have him be so obtuse this season that he would reveal the plan of the Peaky Blinders to kill Mosley to that guy, who then promptly called one of Mosley's men and exposed the entire plan to him. I think that's what happened at the end there, and if that is the case, then that was really disappointing to me. I liked the ending again, but I didn't love how we got there. And finally, I quickly wanted to mention Michael, who has the audacity. What? One of the key themes this entire season is Tommy being afraid that someone's going to overthrow him, someone's going to snatch his throne away from him. And I thought that was a really cool theme. I think that's something that he lives with all the time because, of course, he's at the top and heavy lies the head, etc., etc. But the fact that it came from Michael, the fact that the threat to his throne was a guy who literally flopped. Like, he flopped. In the first episode, it was established that he was a failure in America and he lost the company so much money during the Wall Street crash. And that just completely undermined him as a character. It didn't make him seem like a viable threat to Tommy's throne whatsoever. And I know he had his new wife, Anya Taylor-Joy, whispering in his ear like Lady Macbeth, but there was so little development when it came to that relationship that it really meant nothing. I thought that his rise to power was just completely out of nowhere. I thought it was a joke at the beginning, so I don't think I was quite convinced on that angle of the story. If we'd been talking about Michael for season 3 and season 4, then we would have had a bit more of a conversation, but season 5 Michael is a flop. He is a failure. There's no real competition there. Next up at number 8 we have Fleabag season 2. Now, I actually caught up with this show this year. I wasn't aware of it before this year. I had no idea where all this popularity came from, but I finally got a chance to catch up with it, with season 2 getting all of that hype, and I have to say that this is a really fun show. I very much enjoyed it. I much preferred this season to the first season of the show. I actually think that the first season of the show wasn't that great. I just didn't find it to be as funny and as enjoyable as some people seem to have. I mean, it's so popular. I didn't even know it was a thing. But this season, I think it really came to its own. I much prefer the characters, the character dynamics. I think because a lot of the groundwork had been laid from season 1, to be fair, but it just meant that we were able to just hit the ground running and everyone was well acquainted with one another. We were able to really identify with and understand the character dynamics at work here and appreciate them even more. I especially enjoyed the relationship between Fleabag and Claire. I think that's one of the core relationships in this series, and I love their dynamic. I think they are an incredible pair of sisters. I love the actress who portrays Claire. She's fantastic. I'll have her name over here on the screen, but I think she's absolutely brilliant, as well as, of course, Phoebe Waller-Bridge portraying this somewhat unlikable but also very sympathizable character in Fleabag. Now, this season also introduced the ever popular character of Hot Priest. He's actually known as Priest on the show, I believe, but Andrew Scott as Hot Priest was just highlight of my year. He was phenomenal in this. Oh my goodness. I absolutely loved their dynamic. I mean, he and Fleabag got along so well, and I loved seeing his fallacy. I loved seeing his faults. It was such a unique depiction of a priest, like a Catholic priest. It was really interesting to see, and I really bought their relationship, especially because one of Fleabag's core kind of ideologies is nihilism, and her nihilism clashed so spectacularly with the priest's religion that it made for some very entertaining scenes and sequences. But I also really enjoyed their dynamic because we were able to view Fleabag's world from someone else's perspective for the very first time. For the very first time, we have this character, this guy who's able to see her the way that no one else can, and in fact he can he can see us. He knows that she's talking to someone. He's able to break the fourth wall to some extent as well. And so it's really interesting to see her nihilistic point of view being kind of overshadowed by someone else's point of view. And they're an equal match. And so you really buy their relationship and you really root for them to get together. But of course, he's a priest and it's not meant to be. And that's the frustration of this season, that really, it keeps you engaged, it keeps you on your toes. But at the same time, that ultimate ending of him not ending up with her and choosing God instead of the path of Fleabag, I thought was a bittersweet ending that was just perfect for season 2. All right, so next up at number 7, we have season 3 of The Crown. Now, I absolutely adore The Crown as a show. I talk about this ad nauseum in my review of season 3, which again I'll have linked down in the description below. And as I said in my review of this season, I always love it when The Crown hones in on some of these key historical events that time may have forgotten and looks at them from the perspective of the royal family. It uses the royal family as a sort of vessel to highlight these different events. I am specifically, of course, talking about Aberfan. I think the best episode of the entire season. That episode was just phenomenal. It was heartbreaking in so many different ways. It was emotional, but even the construction of the episode itself, it just made for excellent viewing from start to finish. And I think that is the peak of what The Crown has to offer. I think it's such an excellent show in the way that it's able to juggle the more personal, dramatic and theatrical events that conspire around the royal family with the events happening in the wider world, in the real world, that had greater societal consequences. And I think Aberfan is just a melding of these two things and a showcase of what The Crown can do at its very best. And I think a lot of this season had that on offer, which is why it's on my list here. However, I will say there were elements of the season that did kind of disappoint me. I touched on this again in my review, but mostly the absence of some of these huge historical events like the fall of the British Empire. And I think that should have been a huge story point because it directly relates to the royal family and how their role changed throughout the 20th century. But still, I think season 3 of The Crown definitely delivered on some excellent performances, some excellent character arcs and story arcs, and of course the dresses, the glitz and the glam. That's always fun to see when it comes to anything to do with the royal family. At number 6, we have Unbelievable. Now this is the incredible and unbelievable story of a series of rapes and sexual assaults that occurred in the US across state borders, and also the story of how 2 detectives were able to find out the truth and bring to justice the perpetrator of these horrible, heinous crimes. And I think it's so hard when you're comparing different shows, and some of them are fictional, some of them are based on true stories that really touched people's lives and affected them. It's hard to say like this is better, this is worse, etc, etc. But just in terms of the viewing experience of Unbelievable, I do think it's one of the best shows of this year. Now the 2 incredible female detectives that were able to crack this case are portrayed by Toni Collette and Merritt Weaver, and I really enjoyed both of their performances. I thought they were fantastic, but I especially wanted to highlight Merritt Weaver, who I thought was just absolutely brilliant. She portrayed a very different kind of detective character, in my opinion. She was just so much more quietly intelligent. She was very pensive. I loved her tone of voice. I loved how she was never the loudest in the room, but her thoughts were always heard. I really enjoyed this portrayal of this character because she was kind of a calm presence amongst the chaos that ensued during this case. And having this calming presence there was actually really helpful, especially because she was the character that we were following on the detective's end. And on the other end of things, we were also following one of the rape victims. And I think Caitlin Dever did an excellent job showing us as an audience all of the pain and emotional turmoil that this woman went through as a result of this horrible crime that was committed against her. Her life was never the same again. It was not something that just happened and she had to get over. It was something that impacted her every single day in every single way. This series did an excellent job of showing us how the horrible acts of this one individual affected so many people in so many different ways. And I think that's the other aspect of the show, is to kind of show the impact of the crime itself, as well as showing the impact of these two detectives who refused to stop, who were so persistent and determined in trying to find the perpetrator of these crimes and bring him to justice. At number 5, we have season 1 of The Boys. Now, talk about an explosive entrance into the comic book TV show genre. I love seeing such a different perspective on comic book properties. It was such an interesting insight into an incredibly different world, and I think it was a welcome entry, especially considering the comic book movie slash TV show renaissance that we're experiencing right now. People are already well versed when it comes to comic book lore and comic book tropes, and so now I think it's the perfect time to really dive into it from different perspectives and subvert the genre and turn it on its head, because we've become accustomed to the genre. We already know what's up, so now it's time to flip it and reverse it. I love the characters in this show. I love how violent and cruel and horrible it is. I love that even the people who are supposed to represent hope and truth and the American way can't be trusted because they're deeply corrupted. Now, I already did a full review of this show, so if you want to check that out, again, it'll be linked down in the description. I also have a list of top 5 things I want to see for season 2. But the main downside when it comes to this show for me was the action sequences. I thought they were a little bit subpar, and I also thought it was a missed opportunity to not be able to see the 7 working together as a unit, because you rarely see them working together and actually being superheroes. So I think that's something that they definitely should improve on for season 2. But other than that, I had a great time with this show. I think it's just so fresh and different within the comic book TV show genre, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do for season 2. It's definitely one of my most highly anticipated TV shows of 2020. Speaking of highly anticipated season 2s, at number 4 we have season 1 of The Umbrella Academy. What a breakout series. I absolutely loved this show. It feels like it came out years ago, but it was just because it was at the beginning of 2019 that we had this amazing show dropped on our laps by Netflix. And since then, I have rewatched this show in its entirety twice. That's how much of a fan I am of this show. Now, I've already done a review of The Umbrella Academy, so I'm not going to dive into this too deeply. And I also have a list of 5 things that I want to see for season 2 of the show. Similarly to The Boys, this show really is a breath of fresh air within the comic book TV show genre. I very much enjoyed the character dynamics between the Umbrella Academy itself. I thought the actors did a great job of portraying these individual characters, my favorite of course being Klaus. But they also did a great job of coming together and displaying the sibling dynamics within the group, which I also very much enjoyed. I can't wait to see Ben come back for season 2. Hopefully we'll get more of him, because I loved his and Klaus's dynamic. But just everyone in the show is fantastic. I liked the story of the show. I don't think it was revolutionary, but I think it just works with the characters that we're dealing with. It's so quirky and it's so different, and it's definitely something that stood out to me this year. Alright, so now we're at the final stretch and we're looking at the best of the best TV shows that we had on offer in 2019. But before we get to the top 3, we're going to take a break to appreciate some honorable mentions that unfortunately didn't make it into my top 10 list, but I definitely still wanted to highlight to you guys, just in case you have checked out these shows or you want to. So here we have Good Omens Season 1, Succession Season 2, This Is Us Season 4, Rick and Morty Season 4. I cannot in good conscience give Rick and Morty a place in my top 10 because we're not even finished the season yet. We've only had 5 out of the 10, I think, episodes, so it wouldn't be fair. But I love Rick and Morty. Like, please don't come for me. I'm a huge Rick and Morty fan. It's 5 episodes. It's not even the whole season yet. Come on, give me a break. And lastly, we have the 6th and final season of Silicon Valley, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed that show, and I'm sorry to see it go. Speaking of shows that I'm sorry to see go, I will be doing an in memoriam for the TV shows that we unfortunately lost in 2019, so stick around for that. So now back to our regular scheduled programming. At number 3 we have When They See Us. Now this is an incredible Netflix limited series that is actually a very interesting parallel to Unbelievable. They are both about true stories regarding a heinous act of sexual violence that was badly handled by the police. But where Unbelievable focuses on the detectives and how they were able to solve the case and bring the perpetrator to justice, as well as also focusing on the victim and how her life was impacted by the horrible acts committed by the criminal. In the case of When They See Us, here the focus is the Central Park 5 case, which I wasn't very familiar with as a Brit. I didn't really know much about it, but it's this horrible, horrible case of a woman being raped in the park. Meanwhile, completely unrelated to that event, there's this whole wilding situation with a group of black youths being in the park and kind of hanging out and also fighting. It was a whole mess of a situation. But you have these 5 boys who had absolutely nothing to do with the actual altercation against that woman being arrested and being charged for that crime, a crime that they did not commit. This show dives into the worst case scenario for the police's mishandling of this case, where justice wasn't served for the victim because the wrong people were being punished for her rape for so many years and the perpetrator was still out there at large. And certainly no justice was served for the exonerated 5 who were punished for a crime that they did not commit. And they paid for this crime with their lives with several degrees of severity. Of course, the worst case being Corey Wise, who was deemed old enough to go to an adult prison. This series provides a hard, heartbreaking, unflinching look into the injustice of the justice system, as well as the severe consequences of institutionalized racism and racial profiling within the judicial system, as well as in policing and of course in the media. And finally, if that wasn't enough for you, it also takes a look at the impact, the consequences of incarceration, especially amongst young people, and how it can affect the rest of their lives and create a cycle of crime that is so difficult to get out of. All of the actors give fantastic performances in this show, especially the boys, and of course especially Jarrell Jerome, who I thought was highly deserving of his Emmy win because his portrayal of Corey Wise was just, it was absolutely phenomenal. And of course I have to highlight the genius that is Ava DuVernay, because she told this story in such a brilliant and compelling, compassionate and also angering way that it really did the story, the gravity of this story justice. And number 2, we have a newly discovered favourite in Watchmen. This show gave us the best fictional storytelling that we saw on the big screen in 2019. You can fight me on that. What a beautiful melding of social commentary with this action-packed, enticing comic book storytelling. The two come together beautifully to create this absolutely phenomenal type of storytelling where you're always left guessing, especially in the first half of the season. You have no idea what direction this show is going to take you in, and every single twist and turn is valid. It's just amazing how all of these different elements that at first seem completely unrelated come together to form this greater, bigger picture that just makes for a phenomenal season finale. And I think one of the elements that at first seemed so unrelated to me was of course the most potent element, which is the social commentary and the commentary on racial issues in America, and to be frank, the entire world. And this series opens with the most heartbreaking, gut-wrenching way, that is with the Tulsa massacre that I had absolutely no idea even happened, and it's just another reason why I'm mad at the world now. That opening sequence is easily one of the best opening sequences in any TV show that we have seen, maybe this year, maybe in the last decade, I don't know, like it was so good. And of course there's also that added element of educating us as viewers about this massacre that was very real within this fictional storytelling. And I think it's absolutely amazing how they're able to tie in that tragedy, that disaster that occurred in Tulsa with the reality of the present that exists in the Watchmen world. I think it makes perfect sense that the ramblings of Rorschach within his diary would have been discovered by the alt-right and twisted and turned into this horrible cause. Not to mention the cause already existed long before, it just gave them some sort of legitimacy to do what they were doing. And on top of that, you have the element of Hooded Justice's backstory and how that ties into Angela's story, and it's so good. It's so good. In terms of the characters themselves, I loved Jeremy Irons as Ozymandias. I thought he was brilliant. He's so sassy and witty, and he has a great sense of like dry humor, but he's also incredibly intelligent and incredibly cool. And I like how the show balances making fun of him and his god complex with actually appreciating just how genius the man really is. I also really enjoyed Tim Blake Nelson as Looking Glass, and I liked seeing a bit more of his backstory in the series as well. We didn't really really dive into it too much during the series, but there was an episode where we got to see why he is the way that he is, and we got to find out a bit more about him, and I enjoyed that a lot. But of course, front and center, we have the incredible performance given by Regina King. I am now truly pissed that she didn't get a nomination for her performance in this show, because it's outstanding. She's able to balance so many different elements of this show. It's action packed, it also has comedy, but it also has drama, tragedy. I mean, there's so much going on with this character, and she's able to convey all of these things so well. Are you kidding? She's phenomenal in this. But as a central character, and the way that everything ties into this character so well, and the more you find out about her, the more it makes sense why she's a central character. I think it works. I think it works superbly. And through her, this show explores not just race relations, but also how the burdens of our ancestors can be carried over to us like an inherited wound. And just like William says in the final episode, in order to let that wound heal, you need to air it out. You need to get rid of the mask. And I think it's very telling that by the end of the series, she is no longer wearing her mask. She's no longer wearing her costume. She's a hero in her own right, and the whole world can see who she truly is. Like I said, this is some of the best fictional storytelling that we got this year on the small screen, which leads me to number one. And you might already have guessed what number one is, because I kept yapping on about how Watchmen was the best fictional series, and in that case there's only one real contender. Yes, my number one for the best TV shows of 2019 is Chernobyl. Now, going into this series, I didn't know much about the Chernobyl incident. I've always heard it being referenced in pop culture, or as like a simile or a metaphor, like it's blowing up like Chernobyl, but I never really understood the true consequences of this explosion. And let me tell you, this series was able to school me whilst also entertaining me, and it was just a sight to behold, to see how these series of events unraveled, lie after lie being revealed. It was fantastic. The way that the show is constructed is just a work of art. Let's start off with the performances. Jared Harris and Stellan Skarsgård here are phenomenal. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Emily Watson, who portrays the female scientist. Fantastic. Each and every one of them are just so great. I love the artistic decision to make all of the characters in this show British instead of having them do Russian accents. I was pretty okay with it. I kind of got used to it after a couple of episodes. But there are also some other really striking artistic choices being made here. Like the cinematography, everything just looks so grim and grey and dull, and it's just a reflection of the environment that they are surviving in somehow. It's a reflection of how everything just feels dead. As more and more citizens leave the area and it just becomes more abandoned and more isolated, and the danger zone for radioactivity, it just loses all of its life, and the buildings are left pretty much how they were when the citizens were there, when they were first evacuated. I just think it's such a haunting show. And speaking of haunting, there are so many elements of the show that stuck with me. There's one line I think Stellan Skarsgård says where he realizes that the children in Germany, because of the higher levels of radioactivity, have been encouraged to stay in school, to stay within the building. And yet right in front of him, on the other side of a window that he's looking through, there are kids playing outside within a few miles of the actual explosion site. Like, that's the level of secrecy, that's the level of cover-up that we are dealing with here. That was such a profound scene that really stuck with me. Like, how can people let this happen? Oh, of course, another scene that really stuck out to me was the courtroom scene where Jared Harris is breaking down every single lie, every single cover-up that led to the explosion and led to the mishandling, the gross mishandling of the situation that caused so many people's lives to end. Honestly, words fail me when it comes to this show. This is the sort of brilliance that HBO has become known for. And I really do hope that HBO Max doesn't taint their hard-earned and highly deserved reputation. So that's it for the top 10 TV shows of 2019. But before you guys head off, I wanted to take a moment to appreciate and remember the TV shows that we lost in 2019. Now, these are only the TV shows that I actually watched, so not all of them are here, but I just wanted to take some time to memorialize them and to appreciate them. Some of them were great, others not so much. And if you want to check out my thoughts on Game of Thrones Season 8, which is a notable absence from this list, then I'll link it down in the description box below. So that's it from me. Now that I've told you guys what the best TV shows of 2019 were, in my opinion, it's time for you guys to let me know what your thoughts were down in the comments below. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up in 2020. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.